Okay, so we just saw how using JSON ignore actually made it relatively quite simple for us to handle the issue of the circular references and going down the rabbit hole, so to speak, chasing our tail as we follow the relationships between model objects, right? I'm not going to actually even demo it because you'll notice here in my copy paste file, I do have this global fixed information right in program CS. You can come in and add these options to the JSON serializer for the controllers, right? There's a couple choices you can do: reference handler preserve or ignore cycles. Feel free to play with them and see what they do. But in the end, we're going to use a different approach. So I don't want to confuse students by showing them 16 ways, right? And then you get all confused. I think it's worth knowing about JSON ignore. It's the quick and easy way actually that you're in direct control of. And in many ways, I prefer it anyway. But in the end, we're going to use something else altogether. So rather than beat that to death, we're going to leave it at that. Before I leave this step one, though, it really is fair of me to cover one more thing at least, right? In our patient controller we added, now let me come back to the controller, right? We had our two scaffolded methods, get patients and get one patient, where we know the ID of the patient, right? But let me share one other possible thing we might want to do. How about a filter? Okay. What if we want to see all patients for a given doctor? Well, that's the kind of thing we've done many times in MVC. So I want to show you the differences here. Now, not a big surprise. Okay. I pass in the ID of the doctor to filter by, right? And in my query here, I go patients include doctor, where the doctor ID, that foreign key integer within the patient, matches the parameter passed in. And we just to-list async and await it, and away we go, right? But what's really different here is, look at this. I get to define my own path, because this is all URI based. Every one of these requests, right? That's why we talked about representational state transfer, these REST services. It's all built into the request itself. So, you know, I could put whatever I want here, but I said, well, by doctor, right? And we'll see how that works when I actually run this again. Oh, I should have actually put the dot include for getting the doctor information for the patient, but I'll wait till this is up and running. Maybe I'll do that right now. So I can do my dot include for doctor. In here, except for one thing. Remember, you can't do find async, right? Oh, I never saw that option before. But what I normally do is I go first or default. First or default async. Let me just hit enter here so we're all on the screen together. But using first or default, I can't just pass the ID. I need to pass a link query. P goes to P dot ID equals or compares to ID, right? Okay, so let me just do a hot reload. So come back to the Swagger interface here now. All right, so when I try this out and execute, and then I'm getting all of my patients and doctors with no problem, that's good. By the way, this gets really big if you don't collapse these expands. But look, we have this new one, patient by doctor, right? So to try it out, we have to provide an integer. It's required. So I'll go doctor ID2, click execute, and there we go. So we're only seeing patients who Doogie Howser, who happens to be doctor ID2, is the primary care physician. So there's 3 of them in the database right now that all have Doogie Howser as their doctor. So it just shows it's working. But before I leave this, I want to show you, so here this is all using this nice Swagger interface, but that's for us while we're doing development. Makes it easy for us to test, and we'll be able to eventually see that we can actually test even posting and putting and deleting and everything else through this interface, right? Which is great because we don't actually have to make our own client just to test the functionality of our server. But remember what the actual annotation was we put on our server again. So if I come back to the patient controller, API/controller, right? So let me come up here. I'll just open a new tab. Now I'll just use this one. I can take out Swagger, go API / patient. That's the name of my controller. And of course, it will go to the get by default. So there we're seeing the data, right, itself coming directly. Now, this is the view, so to speak, that our actual client application. It could be a mobile app created in Maui, right, or something like that, or it could be even a console app, or all kinds of different apps can consume these web API, these web services, right, that pass JSON data. It can be any kind of app running on any kind of platform that you can imagine, right? As long as it gets the data, it should know what to do with it. So there you go, right? But we can actually work directly in the URI to access the other actions we have. But it's kind of interesting to notice this one. Remember, this is the one we just added to filter patients by a doctor identified by their primary key. But here is where we define ourselves how we want to actually get it, right? I should probably actually have that like that. Anyway, all right, it did it on its own, I guess. Anyway, patient by doctor. Now, I could put anything I want. I could say by physician. I could say by what, any key. It's up to me what text I use as part of the actual URI, right? But just to demonstrate exactly how this works then, if we're bypassing Swagger and going directly to the API itself, let me type in API / patient, right? That's what we did already once, but now I'm going to go / by doctor. And maybe I'll go /to, the same one we looked at a minute ago, right? So there we are. So these are patients with Doogie Howser. Okay, I guess I just didn't scroll enough to see all of them, but there's actually a fair number here, right? So that's exactly the same code that we were getting through the Swagger interface, but without the interface. This is just the data, and we're calling. Now, as I said, I made up, okay, this particular URI to match, okay, the action that I wanted to respond to the URI's request, right? So if I use a different set of characters here, then I would just make my request match whatever was required. So that kind of drives home the point a little bit. By the way, maybe before I leave this, though, I should point out that it's obviously, it works fine for gets like this. To actually do a put or a post and so on directly through just a browser is a real pain, which is why we use that Swagger interface. It makes our life so much easier. Now, Swagger's still there, right? It's still running. I could open up a new tab and go back to Swagger and go back and forth. That would be not a problem. But I just want to point out the nice formatting we get here. Well, that don't be shocked if you run your application and you don't see that kind of formatting. You know, maybe I'll try a different doctor here just for fun, right? Doctor ID 4 was Woodstock Hightower, right? So all of these patients have Woodstock Hightower. Anyway, don't be surprised if your data isn't nice and laid out like this. Let me copy this URL, and I'll just go maybe to Chrome here, put that in, and there we go. So this is showing you here that different browsers with different settings will show the data. This is just basically one big long string. It's just wrapping around the screen, right? Now, notice in Chrome, I can check off this pretty print, and now it formats it nicely for me, right? So just emphasizing, don't be shocked if you run it, access the API URL directly, and it doesn't look like what you expected, right? You don't always get this nicely indented, easy to read layout, right? It's something you sometimes have to change the setting in order to actually see that. Okay, well, that pretty much finishes the demo for now until we go on to our client, but we'll do that in a new recording.